Thank you so much for attending this extraordinary event. I'm a journalist. My name is Donal McIntyre, and I've known the extraordinary person, the wonderful man and doctor that Ash Kapoor is. And I've known him so many years, and he's just, every time I meet him, I'm elevated, and I'm curious, and I'm fascinated by everything he has to say. What we're going to have today is a 45-minute lecture and talk with Ash, and then we'll have a Q&A and try and restrict everybody to one question per person. We'll also have Noah Laith from the Longevity Clinic here. He'll be also available for questions and answers. And of course, afterwards, you can follow up in a more detailed kind of chit-chat, relaxed forum outside in the other rooms. But meanwhile, a huge round of applause for the man of the moment, the extraordinary, the wonderful Ash Kapoor.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. I feel privileged, humbled, and honored to talk about a subject that's very dear to me. Basically, it's living, the subject of longevity. I think before we go into the detail, there should be some things that you should take away from this conversation. There are three main points. Understanding my journey into longevity, and that's really important because most of my career has been in the National Health Service, and the shift to longevity, the context needs to be sort of explained. We also need to know why we need to change, the challenges and the obstacles that we've got, and more importantly, how we do this. How do we make this change? So my journey is no different to probably 99% of NHS doctors. We start our journey in the hospital system, doing various rotations. In my case, it was general medicine, general surgery, obstetrics and gynecology, pediatrics, psychiatry, and A&E. And ultimately, we were all outcome driven, and the outcomes in the hospital system was very much fix and exit. We fixed people and then we moved them on. We didn't actually have any conversations about how they lived, what was going on. It was a very fast turnover environment, but a great place to learn. Following that, I decided to go into general practice, and where I still am. And within the general practice, I learnt skills in minor surgery, joint injections, and also became a trainer for Kent, Surrey, Sussex Deanery. The overview there, rather than fix and exit, was maintain and monitor. It was simply about keeping the status quo going. The way that GPs work, it's about looking at the safety of the drugs we prescribe, looking for markers, and it was very much that monitoring and maintaining role. As you progress in your career in medicine, you tend to get pulled into politics. So I was a member of a number of health transformation boards. The issue with that was, my feeling was that it was about changing systems, but it really wasn't. It was about shuffling money between the hospitals and general practice and playing table tennis. So we didn't really change anything. The systems over the last 30 years haven't truly evolved or transformed. So that was the world that most of us live in. And it's quite blinkered, it's quite siloed. But I was very fortunate that during that 30-year career, I looked after a cottage hospital in Molesey. And this hospital basically looked after the frail and elderly, and it looked after those who had acute care in hospitals but couldn't quite go home. And it was something that we have overseen for some years now and still continue to oversee. The main change over that 30 years is that the majority of the patients now coming in were not having medical problems. They were having social problems. They were not able to mobilize properly. Their cognitive function was in decline. There was very little medical intervention that was being done. The other point was that there is something known as a respect form, which is almost like a do not resuscitate form. And 90% of the patients who were in there chose not to be resuscitated. In other words, they didn't want to continue to live. So it was tragic in the sense that all the work we've been doing in outcomes here was buying years to people's life, but not actually life itself. So it led me to look into genomics, to think, could there be a better way of functioning? And the research through looking at genomics, that is why we age, brought two things to the surface which intrigued me. One was that in well-being, if all of you currently feel well, you're still only living to 50 to 70% of your optimal state. That's quite scary in the sense that there's all this potential that we're not capitalizing on. It also showed me why certain treatments, lifestyle measures don't work. So people can still feel fatigued, low mood, weight gain. Despite all their efforts, nothing seems to shift. So those were the key things that drove me to look at this in more detail. So that brought us to longevity. And what is longevity? It's living longer and better. Now, the one thing about there's questions behind all of these, because we haven't defined these in science. What is living, what is longer, and what is better? So in terms of living, how do we define living from existing? And we've gone around the houses in the last 10 years, but we've come up with a definition that individuals should be independent, they should have purpose, they should be purposeful. Now, most of the animal kingdom are independent and purposeful, but the thing that makes us different as humans is the next bit. It's called fulfillment or joyfulness. So on those three criteria, that's what we define living should be. Purposeful, joyful, and in terms of activities, independent. The longer. Now, what is longer? Is it longer than your parents, longer than your peers, longer than the community you live in? In genomic terms, longer in the labs has been defined as 123 years today. So if you are born today, you have the potential to live to 123. Then it comes to the better. Again, what does better look like? Better is a subjective term, better than you were yesterday, better than you were a few years ago. So we had to define better. Now that was much harder. So the living was the independent, purposeful, the pursuit of fulfillment. The age is 125. The better was really going back to root cause analysis. And when I say root cause analysis, there's no bigger root than your cells, because your cells make your tissues make your organs, and with that, you live. So if we're going to optimize our living, we've got to go back to the basics. So we've now defined longevity. Better equals longevity via cellular medicine, and that's the definition of longevity medicine. So we do everything to protect that cellular function. Now, just to give you some context of how important this is, in the womb, we make 1 million cells per minute, and we make 250,000 new neuron cells, the brain cells. That's the capacity of the growth. After birth, where we replace our cells regularly, that number goes up to 3.8 million cells per second. In context, we're made of 30 trillion cells, but we also coexist with 23 trillion bacteria. So we are not alone in our physiology. We have all of these ecosystems working for us. So cellular medicine defines being better. Now, in order to understand how we can achieve that, we need to understand why we die. Now, to me, decline is a pathway to death. So if we're going to change things, we need to know how decline happens, why it happens, where does it happen, and when does it happen. So these are the things that are really important if we're going to change the way we function. The how has actually been defined in science. Over the last 20 years, there's been 300,000 papers written on what happens to our cells to make them decline. Now, 2 years ago, there were 11 things. Now there are 12, and they're called the 12 hallmarks of aging. Now, it's astonishing that we can narrow it down to only 12 things. And if we can understand what those 12 things are, we can make a difference. Those 12 things have been split into 3 main categories. The primary category, which I'll talk about, the antagonistic category, and the integrative category. So we'll go into a little bit of detail about what all of those mean. The primary hallmarks, of which there are 3 or 4 things, are the fundamental damage to your cell. So when your genes, which make your cells, are unstable, if they're surrounded by toxins, they don't work properly. We all have something called telomeres at the end of our genes. They're like the shoe cap to our shoelace. And basically, because we generate 3.8 million cells per second, there will be things that don't work out. Now that dysfunction is passed on to the telomere. It's like the shock absorber of a car. But if we're getting a lot of damage, those telomeres shorten, and soon they're not there to protect your gene and things can go wrong. Epigenetic alterations. Now, epigenetic is a fascinating sort of specialism. Your genes are surrounded by an environment, and that environment's called your epigenetics. And what we've now found is that even if you inherit bad genes, if you control the environment around them, you can switch them off. So your genes are not your destiny, as we believed before. So the environment that they live in can control the outcome. The expression of your genes is epigenetics. And that's quite a major thing. So if we can work something around there, it'll make a big difference. Loss of proteostasis. We are made of protein. Every single one of us is made of chains of amino acids called proteins. As we decline, the protein starts suffering in terms of its architecture, its matrix, but also its numbers. So we find that aging is about losing quality protein, and we can mitigate against that. The fourth thing is called macroautophagy. When you're generating 3.8 million cells in well-being and potentially 5 million cells in ill health per second, there's going to be combustion fuel. This debris accumulates in every one of our 30 trillion cells. And that is important because it slows the cell down. If we can manage that, then those cells can continue to function. So it's the debris accumulating in your cells that cause it to be damaged. Those are the fundamental things that go wrong. Now, the body doesn't let this happen. We have things that occur to protect us against those hallmarks. The problem is the initial response, which helps protect us, if it's an ongoing onslaught to our cells, becomes detrimental. So in other words, what's good for us in short doses is very bad for us in chronic terms. An example, if our body requires sugar for growth, things like insulin will go up and the sugar is used for growth purposes. If, however, we have a lot of stress or poor diet, that insulin is artificially raised and over time will start causing damage. So what is initially good in short bouts becomes bad in long-term onslaught. Same with mitochondrial dysfunction. Your mitochondria are your dynamo, your batteries. Your 30 trillion cells have mitochondria that create energy. Now, if you're constantly being damaged, that energy is going to be utilized in the wrong way. That mitochondria is going to become tired. It's not going to function properly. And then the cells that are produced from there become zombie cells. They become tired. It's what we call cellular senescence. Now, the problem with zombie cells is they infect cells around them. So we know in dementia and Alzheimer's disease, this zombie cell affects the brain cells around it and causes this abnormal protein to be created. And that's why dementia or Alzheimer's dementia happens. So we can mitigate against that too. The third thing is the primary is what goes wrong. The third is the response initially of the body, but then a reaction which is detrimental. And then there's consequence. The consequence is that your baby cells, your stem cells, have to work much harder, much longer to try and keep producing cells to replace the old ones. So our stem cells get exhausted. Our supply chain drops. Altered intercellular communication. The cells stop talking to each other. When they're not working properly, they don't communicate. Now, we are one. Everything speaks to each other, and that's why we function. If we lose that communication channel, it's a bit like a city where the government doesn't talk to the council, no one talks to each other, things go into decline. The body is no different to that. Now, chronic inflammation, this is an important concept. We think about inflammation as joint swelling or some form of mechanical disorder, but inflammation is the body in distress. And when the body's got all these things going on, it will be distressed and it will show things that will not show up in blood tests. It will not show up in any other form until it's progressed a lot longer. So chronic inflammation has now been identified as the root cause for almost every disease. So that is an expression of those things going wrong. And dysbiosis. Now, we talk a lot about gut microbiome and gut problems. Your gut is your second brain. 70% of your immune system sits in your gut, and particularly your small intestine. So when things go wrong here, your ecosystem, your 23 trillion bacteria in that ecosystem go out of range. And then the gut gets leaky and causes further problems. So you go into this spiral of decline, and hence things start going wrong and we start aging. So now we've identified the how we decline. We then move on to why we decline. Now, this is a really important slide because we adapt to our environment. All these changes that have occurred over hundreds of thousands of years has been based on the environment we live in. Now, genes don't adapt quickly. There's, at earliest 5,000, 10,000 years for this adaptation to occur. So each of these stages that we're seeing up to this individual here is between 50 to 100,000 years. Now, this, therefore, is really where your cells are, okay? Because for what's happened now is that the environment has moved quicker than our cells are. So the last 200 years have seen a massive evolution in the way we live, what we do, modernization. But the cells are still sitting here. And we're becoming different. Now, why? Because the cells are in distress. We live in abundance. We're built for scarcity. And you can see the general picture of decline. Now, between here and here is probably only 30 or 40 years. The net going down with the iPhones, etc. So the environment is moving so swiftly that our cells cannot cope with it. And although we do not feel it, those hallmarks of aging are operating at a much more faster level. We are now seeing a lot more early diseases like autoimmune disease, anxiety, mood disorders, and really it's a state of distress. We then move into the whys. Now, the distress can be caused by internal reactions, but external things going on. Now, there are a couple of things. The ones that I mentioned here are not visible to us. They're invisible. The average household has something like 300 toxins floating around, which we don't see. It's invisible. So air pollution, lots of heavy metals, aluminium, lead, mercury, which we're breathing in every day. The water is polluted at a micro level, which we're drinking. The soil isn't what it used to be. With agricultural changes and the need for lots of surplus food, the soil's been manipulated, and again, there's contamination at that level. Electromagnetic fields, we're surrounded by invisible radiation, internet, Wi-Fi, etc. And all of these are having an influence on our body, because ultimately we are a circuit, and we react to these external environments. Chemical exposures, plastic, foods, etc. And radiation, which we're not visibly seeing. So these invisible threats are coming into us, and the brain is registering them as something that shouldn't be there. It's sending impulses down to your physiology, your body, and the body's reacting. The problem is, unlike before, where primordial man had physical threats, i.e. being run after by a saber-tooth tiger or being cut, wounded, infection, those were things that the body understands because we come from that physical world. Well, these things the body doesn't understand. So the brain is sending impulses saying, we're in distress. And the body's looking back and saying, to what? I don't know what to do with this because I don't understand it. So the brain then dictates a chronic inflammatory state. It carpet bombs your immune system, saying, because I don't know what to do, all of you work. And when this happens, you get this invisible process in your body. It's a second furnace that depletes you. You don't see it, you don't feel it, but over time you start declining. You start declining at a number of levels. So these things are things that we have to watch out for, or be at least mindful of. Then the internal reaction. We talked about inflammation as being one of them. Hormonal imbalances. Energy production goes down. The nerves start suffering. Your immune system starts suffering. You start reacting differently. You're unable to detoxify. And then you start getting other things going on. Now, what I need to sort of talk about a little bit about the internal system. Life requires energy. Effectively, if you're going to live longer, better, you need to conserve energy. Now, if your immune system is struggling with these invisible stressors, it's going to get tired. Unlike a car without petrol that stops, you're not allowed to, so the body digs deeper. It sort of borrows your immune system for energy. And when that gets tired, it borrows your hormones for energy. And when that gets tired, it goes to the cortisol, your fight or flight gland. And I'd say 95% of us are in fight or flight. We don't realize it, but we bring purpose, deadlines, things right from school onwards. We've accepted this as normal, but actually, for your cells that are still on the savannah, it's foreign. So fight or flight, most of us run on adrenal energy at the moment, which means we've depleted all the other points. And that's useful to know because what we assume is normal is not, which is why we're at 50% of what our optimal capacity should be. So now we understand how it happens and why it happens. Where does it happen? So this is where there's sort of a difference between traditional medicine and longevity medicine. In the traditional system, we are rewarded to find symptoms and diseases. And so if I make a diagnosis of blood pressure, then I will effectively act on that endpoint, that expression. So I'll suppress the blood pressure with blood pressure tablets. If I don't know what I'm doing in a particular specialism, heart disease or respiratory, I refer to a specialist. Now that specialist doesn't look at anything else except the heart or the respiratory system or wherever I refer. There's no talking. So everyone's working in a silo way in the specialisms. Then it comes to the reference ranges. These reference ranges have not been based on precision medicine. They've not been based on you as an individual. They've been based on the whole population. So effectively, you take a group of patients, you work out an average, and that's your reference range of normality. Anything on this side's wrong and anything on this side's wrong. But that's not how humans are. Humans are different, they're in context, and within that reference range, there is an optimum state. So in longevity medicine, we look at that optimum state, not the population state. The other thing about traditional medicine, it hasn't really truly changed in 30 years. So the blood pressure tablet numbers may have gone up from 10 to 200 in terms of what they are, but technically we're still going around the same circle. We're treating the expression of disease, not the root cause. Longevity is very different. Longevity takes the view that the body talks to itself. All your 30 trillion cells are interconnected. And when there is a symptom, we don't call it a symptom, we call it a signal. So if you have high blood pressure, this is a reaction to something else going on in your body. So root cause means going further in and looking. The important thing we've learnt through longevity is that the body does not work in isolation and everything happens everywhere at the same time. So if your blood pressure is up, it means literally every single cell in your 30 trillion is distressed. It may not be expressing it today, but it is distressed. So longevity medicine looks at everything. And we've defined everything by the psychology, the neurology, the immunology, and the endocrinology. And we cannot differentiate any of those things. So if there is a state of depression, the body is also in distress. And so if we just focus on psychiatry and just deal with the endpoint, we're not going to get resilient results. We've got to look at the whole together. So that is the key thing about the difference between the traditional system and the longevity system. One is truly about root cause, and the other is about suppressing the expression of that root cause. When does this happen? So you'll note that you'll be invited in for health checks at a certain age, 50, 60, 70. But truly, the decline starts much earlier than that. It actually starts at the point of conception. So because of these external threats, the process that the 12 hallmarks of aging start coming into play from conception onwards. And we, again, don't pay much attention to that. But we've seen how many cells are made in the womb. And particularly in the womb, there's tissue and organ creation. It's a very powerful place. After birth, it's all about maintenance of the cells. But the good news is, wherever it starts, it is totally reversible. If you did post-mortems on people at the age of 90 and looked at these baby cells waiting to become brain, heart, kidney, they exist. So if stem cells can exist at 90, it means our reserve has not totally gone. Our systems are broken, so everything can be reversed. You're built to fix yourself at almost every level. So what do we do about it? What is the solution to all of this? Now, the medical model is very confusing. There's so many, well, there's 20,000 FDA-approved drugs. There's 126,000 diseases. It's a very complex place, and on top of that, multiple specialisms are involved in care. The nutraceutical or functional world is equally very complex. Which vitamins to take, when to take them, what to do. Should I go for breath work? Should I go for cryotherapy? It's a very confusing place to be at the moment. So what we've done in the last 10 years is try and work out what is the best strategy and approach to ensure that it all works. And usually it's not an issue of the intervention, it's the timing of that intervention. And what we've discovered is if you work through things in a specific order, everything works. And that order we've sort of put into what we call the 6R approach. The first thing is restore. That's the foundations of your nutrition. We'll talk about that. The next is release, which is a detoxification. And only when you've restored and released can you repair. And then following the foundational repair, you can then renew, and then you can revisit through reframe. So we'll go through each of these in a bit more detail. So restore, what does that mean? It means rebalance and replenish the body. But there's some fundamental foundations that need to be rebalanced before we go to the higher level work. And those involve key nutrients. Now, for us, we've identified 3 key nutrients. Vitamin D, which is actually not a vitamin, it's a hormone, ferritin, iron, and B12. If you get these 3 things in the right optimal ranges, which are very different to the NHS reference ranges, you're building the scaffolding and the infrastructure of progression. Once these are in place, we then look at hormones. Now, hormones have had a bad press because it's all about menopause or perimenopause or testosterone in gyms. But actually, hormones decline by 1% per year from the age of 30 in normal life. Remember, hormones are a source of energy, and if you're depleting, your body will steal that to use for other purposes. So we're now seeing declining hormones at the age of 20, where people are working super hard and the body's using these resources to restore itself. But then, of course, there's downstream consequences. So for us, we cannot work until the networks are sorted. And hormones are like the lanes on the M25. They are the highways along which everything moves and gets to talk to each other. Without them, you're going to have potholes and roadblocks, so it doesn't matter how good the nutrition is, it's not going to get from A to B. So for us, hormone restoration is a very important fundamental area. It doesn't have to be forever. It could be a state of time where you repair it and then it switches itself back on again. So we work in the first R in foundation restoration. The second R then becomes the release, the elimination of toxins and barriers. Now, we said before that this process of decline can start at conception. Your cells are working really hard, and like any engine, there's combustion fuel. Now, when it's in the body, it's your liver's job to get rid of it. But the liver's got a day job to do, and if this system is working hard and accumulating, you'll build up toxins. So removing toxins is really important, but there are other toxins in our body, so we'll just go through those. The one element that we don't think about is the fact that we have storage tanks of food within us. We have the quick energy, sugar, and that's stored in something called glycogen. And we also have protein stored in the form of debris. Now, every time your 3.8 million cells get replaced, the old cells don't leave you. They stay within your 30 trillion cells, almost like garbage protein, ready to be used when you're starving. Because remember, primordial man, or where we should be, didn't eat for 3 or 4 days because there was no food. So we have developed ways of coping with that. And these things get recycled in those scenarios. The second thing to say about that is that we live in abundance. So that protein debris in most of us probably hasn't been emptied out for all our lives. And it's just accumulating, and it releases inflammatory reactions. Professor Usimi won the Nobel Prize in 2016 when he discovered that by just removing this debris, you can almost stop all chronic diseases, including mitigating against cancer. So it's a very powerful adaptive process that we've developed over millions of years, which we don't use anymore because our environment's changed. Once we empty out the protein and the sugar, your whole physiology will change. So we do a lot of work with fasting, autophagy fasting. Some of you have done the schemes where we ask you not to eat for 3 days, and then we put you on 1 meal a day of plant food for 10 days to ensure you eat from the back of your fridges. So you're not feeding the front, and you'll be feeding from the back. And once we've emptied out the sugar and the protein, there's only one other larder to go to, and that's the fat larder. So you'll start biohacking your own fat. You don't have to go to gyms, you don't have to do anything. The body will utilize fat for energy because the other two are not there. Now, the beauty of the fat metabolism is your brain is 70% fat. And fat gets into the brain through the blood-brain barrier very easily. And the good news is that when your brain gets fed before your stomach does, the dopamine response for craving just goes away. So a lot of our patients who've done autophagy find that they don't crave sugar, they don't crave food, they don't crave alcohol, they stop smoking. So the dopamine responses are entirely linked to how our food systems are working. And so once you've emptied out these, your inflammation goes. And some of those markers that we've talked about disappear. The other thing that we need to look at is our gut, because our gut's our second brain. And over the years, the gut has had significant insult. And that is because we eat badly, although food is no longer the same nutrition it used to be. Every thought, everything you've seen in your mind or spoken about is translated to your gut. Your gut is your second brain. They're twins, they look after each other. So distress in the brain becomes distress in the gut. And that distress comes out as inflammation. And that inflammatory process creates rust, a bit like the debris inside your body. You develop debris in your gut. And these are like layers of rust. And the back wall of the gut then starts breaking down. And we get something called leaky gut syndrome, where toxins come in. So these toxins that shouldn't come into the body and start creating further reactions. So we cannot work in any format to restore people without looking at gut. And we have ways of detoxifying the gut. A lot of you are taking Quenda. We've got Quenda here, but it's probably one of the most profound herbal treatments there is. But what it does, it just literally scrapes the rust away from the gut so you can see the back wall. And by seeing the back wall, all the probiotics you might want to take, digestive enzymes, will actually function. They won't work if the gut's full of rust. So this is why some of the good interventions don't actually help us, because we're too toxic. So gut detox is super powerful. Once things are in your body, there's only one other organ that's responsible for clearing things out, and that's your liver. Now, the problem with the liver, it has a day job, but if the gut's not working, it has several other jobs to do. And it accumulates. It has a waiting list. And that waiting list creates inflammation. And now there's data showing that the inability to detoxify through your gut can cause heart disease. It can cause dementia. And it makes sense. With all these toxins you're not able to get rid of them, they will go and infest the other 30 trillion cells. So by fixing the gut, you are decompressing the liver, the spleen, and the kidney, the other organs of immunity. So it's a very simple process. Clean out before we fix. So that's probably one of the most profound things we do when it comes to regenerative medicine. It's not easy, but this particular part of the journey means everything else will work much better. The third R is repair. So we've basically fixed your infrastructure. We've cleaned out the system. We're now in a position to repair the body. Stage 1 and stage 2 is not a long period. It's about 6 weeks. So we're not talking a huge amount of time. But we're getting rid of things that have accumulated over many, many years. The repair process then is basically rebooting fundamental body processes. And what we've done here is look at the world we live in, which is very sympathetically driven, fight or flight, right from day one. The thing is, we feed into it. So if you're good at school, you'll do harder exams, you'll get into a harder university, and then you'll get into a harder job. So we're constantly in fight or flight and aspiring to that and rewarding it. So what we found in modern day, the rebooting process really just involves two elements: rebuilding our circadian rhythm and repairing our gut. Now, what is circadian rhythm? Circadian rhythm is essentially a process that's been going on for millions of years. It basically says we must sleep at night and be awake in the day, okay? And with that, all our hormones are used to that cycle. So, for example, when you wake up at 7 in the morning, your cortisol levels double. That's why you wake up. And then they double again. And so between 7 and 8, you should see a doubling of your cortisol levels. Now, if your cortisol gland's tired and you've got something called adrenal fatigue, you're not going to get that wake up. You're going to wake up unrefreshed, unhealthy. The other thing that happens is your hormones kick in at that point. Your testosterone and your DHEA, again, energy hormones come in. But of course, if you're using it as a source of energy, you're not going to have them. So for us, it's very important that we look at circadian rhythm and try and change your lifestyle so it fits with that. Now, of course, we can't go backwards to the jungles, but we can mitigate against it. So one of the things to remember is there's a very powerful hormone that comes into play when you sleep, and that's called melatonin. Melatonin is a hormone that only comes out when you're sleeping. But of course, if you're not sleeping, not only are you not making melatonin, it means cortisol's out there. It's almost like your brain is saying, there's a saber-tooth tiger under your bed, I'm not going to let you sleep. So we have to realize that trying to get people into a sleep pattern is very important. So how do we do that? Well, we restore. We restore things that matter, like melatonin. We try and calm the cortisol gland down by using adaptogenics like ashwagandha, Cerephos, and a number of other things. So calming the cortisol gland down, improving melatonin, you get into circadian rhythm, and you start healing at night. Very powerful. The other thing is, having cleaned out the gut, we need to fix the ecosystem, the 23 trillion bacteria. So we do a lot of work in the repair on gut microbiome, using high-level pre, pro, postbiotics, using peptides to remake the gut wall. That, to me, is really the most important thing in modern day. If we can get those two things done, the body can build up resilience. It's a very important thing. Now, the opposite to your fight or flight sympathetic nervous system is your parasympathetic nervous system. It's called the vagus nerve. And now we call our vagus nerve the rest and digest nerve. Because ultimately, if you're sympathetically charged, you're not going to be able to rest and you're not going to be able to digest. So anyone who's got ongoing chronic gut symptoms or poor sleep, is because this guy's working much harder than the other guy. The sympathetic's working harder than the parasympathetic. So we need to listen to these signals. Once we've restored that, again, a 30-day sort of cycle, we can then move into what I call renew. Now, renew is a very powerful thing. You've kind of built the resilience of the body, you've got the detoxes working, your gut's protected. You're then in a position where you can look at your cells and make them even better, because that's what cellular medicine is all about. It's aspiring to being the best version of yourself. And so what do we do there? Well, basically, the main goal is to build on the micronutrients and the foundation nutrients we talked about, the iron, the vitamin D. So we have some high-level micronutritional support that we put into play. One of them is bioregulator peptides. Now, what are peptides? They're just proteins. You get them from chicken, fish, etc. But they're very special in the sense that they're like Lego pieces of amino acids. The smallest form of protein is an amino acid. It comes together in different sequences called peptides. And each peptide serves every organ of your body. You have a peptide for your eye, for your heart, for your kidney. And over the last 100 years, we've been able to identify peptides for almost every organ. And what these are nutraceuticals. They're nutrition because they're amino acids. You eat them, they find their way to the right part of the gene, they open the gene, they give it a clean and say, here's the protein, keep working. Studies in the US have shown that just using two peptides, one for your pineal gland, the gland that makes melatonin, and one for your thymus gland, which makes white cells to protect your immune system. Taking these peptides for a period of 15 years, it was a study done on 60-year-olds. They gave one group of 60-year-olds peptides, they asked them to eat healthy and exercise, and they gave another group just to eat healthy and exercise. And they watched their biological aging. And at the age of 75, those who were on peptides, on only two peptides, were 26% younger. And that's significant. And that's just two peptides. So they're very powerful. Unfortunately, there was a battle in the US about whether peptides should be drugs or not. It's been going on for several years. And last year, the FDA won the battle. So peptides, up until last year, are now no longer available. It's not the case in the UK. I think what I've heard today is that Mr. Kennedy is trying to revoke that. He's going after the FDA to bring it back and saying peptides should be available to everybody. But it's a very powerful place for regenerative medicine. The other thing is other micronutrients. Now, there's so many vitamins out there, but you've got to look at what lane you live in. If you're working an 18-hour day and it's a very cerebral job, you need to feed your brain more than you need to feed your body. If you're physical and athlete, you change. So the focus of the micronutrition is very much dictated about what you do. But I would say 99% of us live a cerebral life at the moment. It's not so much physical. So it's very important that we look at feeding the brain, of course, feeding the immune system, and feeding your mitochondria. So there are certain things like NMN for the mitochondria. There are nootropics like B12. Nootropics are things that feed the brain. Dopamine, things that improve your dopamine production. And also the fats, because your brain is fat. Having things like choline through fats helps protect the blood barrier, the brain barrier, the cells of the brain, to avoid abnormal proteins like Alzheimer's disease, beta amyloid plaque coming out. So the focus of renewal is about the higher level of nutrition. It's very difficult to find a solution with the hundreds of vitamins. I mean, there is Dr. Ward who's developed the 90 essential nutrient plan. I think Elite are here, where they've got a powder that has all the 90 nutrients in it, which is very easy. If you're busy, you just simply take that and you can feed the whole system. We then move into the reframe. Now, what is reframe? So reframe to me is you've got yourself to a certain level and you're better than you were 90 days ago. But is that truly your best or most optimal place? Probably not, because again, medicine shows that if we keep working on that cellular medicine, we just get better and better. So the reframe is, where else do I want to go? Now, when you are working efficiently, your immune system's working efficiently, your gut's working efficiently, you will change as an individual. Your bandwidth in your brain, the physiology is different, and you will aspire to doing more, be more interested in taking it to another level. So we always bring people back to look at a reframe as to where they want to be. And it may be just stay where they are, but a lot of patients saying, what's next? Where else can I go with this? So it's building on the better. And here we look at something a little bit more sort of challenging. So I mentioned the word hormesis. Now, hormesis is a form of stress. Now, we said that stress or anything in proportion is good, but when it's chronic, it becomes bad. It's the same with stress. Your body's been built on physical stressors. So if you can create short, sharp stresses for your body, it's actually good for you. It creates an environment where the bad things are killed off. So things like ice baths, steam, breath work are all forms of short, sharp stresses which are very good for you. And again, but you have to be resilient to get to that stage. There's no point putting this intervention at the beginning because it won't work. Now, as we are cerebral beings, and the majority of us are dictated by what our brain thinks, mindfulness has now become probably one of the most powerful things that we need to look at. But again, when the body's in distress, depleted, it's not going to go in the mindfulness mode. It's a bit like trying to do yoga when there's a saber-toothed tiger sitting behind you. You're not going to go into that zone. So you have to replete before those interventions work. But it's all about calming the sympathetic nervous system down and maintaining a good vagus flow. Once we've got people in a stable place, we would definitely bring in things like mindfulness. We talked a little bit about nootropics, that's the brain food. And then, subject to what you do, we set a maintenance program. And it's not millions of vitamins, because remember, you're clean now. You're going to be able to digest your food. You're going to be able to detox. It's just about the maintenance program. And again, that's very personal, but it involves some of these things. So all of the stuff I've talked to you about is formed from research. So how do we apply these into practice? Now, one might think that we do fancy tests, we do interesting MRIs, CTs. No, not really. We basically keep it very simple. We talk to the patient. Now, the patient narrative is very important because if you take a history from the minute you were born and what's happened to you, you can then work out where things might have gone wrong. It may not even be obvious to you, but there are certain stressors that may kick into place. It may be one big event, it may be multiple. So the patient narrative is super important. And then it comes to the tests. Well, there's only two real tests that matter for us. One is your body composition index, where we get you on a scale, we turn you inside out, and look and see how much fat you've got, water, minerals, muscle. Now, it's really important that in a world where we are all quite stressed, the body becomes a donut-making factory. In other words, when the brain tells the adrenal gland we're in stress, the body says, okay, I'm going to get everything in place so we can run away from this stress. So it makes sugar. It makes sugar from muscle, from fat. It puts sugar in the system. It gets your heart working quicker, through adrenaline and epinephrine. So you get into a state of fight or flight. Now, of course, if you're not running anywhere and it was just a difficult email, that sugar will turn into fat. So when we look inside your body, we look for visceral fat, what I call inflammatory fat that you're creating, not eating. This is why people, they have great diets, but they don't lose weight because their stress levels are so high, they're actually making donuts. I say to these individuals, you're making 20 donuts a day. If you weren't stressed, you could eat 2 and still lose weight. Because that is absolutely the key thing. It's not about what you're doing externally, it's how your body's reacting. So the body comp index will tell us how inflamed you are. Heavy metal testing. This is something that's really important now because it's invisible. 100% of our patients over the last several years are all aluminium toxic. Those born before 1980s, mercury and lead. So these heavy metals are in us and they're accumulating. Now the problem is they take 30 years for 50% to leave you. So they have a half-life of 30 years. So we are constantly accumulating, living in cities and towns. So it's really important to know what's going on in that level because it all comes into the detox. The testing, well, we have to do a general test. The general test, again, is things like your cholesterol, your blood count, your diabetic risk, your kidney, your liver, but also your micronutrients. Now, the difference is we don't do different tests to the NHS, but our reference ranges are different. How we listen to the tests are different. So we don't look at being okay. We look at what levels do you need to be at your best. B12 is a typical example. Most people would be satisfied at 250. Some NHS trusts now do not give you a number above 250. But actually, human optimization says you need to be between 900 to 1500 to stop getting dementia. Vitamin D, again, 40 or 50 is a reference range that you'll hear. We try and run our patients between 175 to 200. Why? Because all the data on vitamin D reference ranges was based on bone protection only. You have 300 other receptors to vitamin D. We now know through research that if your vitamin D levels are between 175 to 200, you reduce your dementia risk 17 times. It's massive, it's huge. It's also an immune modulator. So it's a bit of a miracle hormone, but again, it's about reference ranges. So we look at tests differently and we look at optimizing your micronutrition. Cholesterol. Now, this is really important because we're kind of a bit obsessed about dropping cholesterol levels because the feeling is that it is cholesterol that causes your arteries to clog up and causes strokes and heart attacks. The reality is all your hormones are made from cholesterol. So if you don't have cholesterol, you cannot make hormones. If you cannot make hormones, you don't have the highways. If you don't have the highways, you're going to get inflamed. So a recent paper in The Lancet 2 years ago showed that patients over the age of 60 with raised cholesterol had less heart disease than those with lower cholesterol. Cholesterol is an innocent bystander. So we talked about the bad fat that develops around your organs. LDL cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, is a consequence of inflammation. So it's not the cause of heart disease, it's a signal of inflammation. And what we should be doing is going one step further down and getting rid of the inflammation and not obsessing about the cholesterol. It's a really important thing. And now there's even more data coming out. The healthcare insurance business in America looked at 370 million people's data from how they lived and how they died. But all the centennials, those who lived over 100, had raised cholesterol. So again, we've got to be mindful of the impact of pharma on this subject. Asim Malhotra is a great believer. He's an interventional cardiologist in Croydon who's written a book called A Statin-Free Life. And he talks about the fact that it's not about the cholesterol. The cholesterol is just there, but it's the inflammation you need to work on. The other thing about statins is statins drop cholesterol, but they also drop many other things that you need. So CoQ enzyme 10 is an enzyme made in the brain that helps energy production in the brain. Statins can drop that by 95%, which means that your risks of dementia are going to increase significantly. So again, we need to look at the whole picture and not just at the linear silo medicine. So again, the interpretation is very important. Hormones are very important because, again, the hormones can be stolen, and if we work that out, we can help support the well-being. So, but in all of this, the most important person is you. What you say to us tells us this whole story. And all the tests we do just confirm it. There's a 98% correlation between what you've said and what these tests show, which tells me that we need to sort of empower your intuition. You know, if you're not feeling right, it's not a medical disease. It's a signal that you need to look into. And if we can do that, we can make a big difference. There's lots of testing you can do. You can do 24-hour blood pressure. You can buy these CGMs. But your internal co-pilot is with you 24/7. We need to listen to it. There's no other testing that can achieve that. So it's really, really important that we need to not hand over control to experts, but just listen to ourselves. So what have we achieved in the 10 years of regenerative medicine? To be honest, we look after any entry point because the exit point are the 5 Rs. The context and the amount varies, but actually it can treat almost everything. So from the muscular disorders, the musculoskeletal disorders, we're talking about joint pains, we're talking about arthritis, we're talking about muscle fatigue. In the autoimmune world, again, autoimmunity is not a disease, it's a signal of dysfunction. So by rebuilding your immune system in the way that we've talked about, things like lupus, psoriasis, rheumatoid, can all go because you were never broken. The treatments we give for these are suppress the immune system even more. So we're trying to get rid of the pain, but we're not getting rid of the root cause. There's a gentleman called Professor Coimbra in South America who treats all autoimmune disease just with vitamin D. The ranges or the dosing is between 100,000 to 300,000 units a day. And Medscape have done a literature research on all his work and they found no safety issues at all. So it just shows you that if we fix things, they will behave again. So autoimmunity is something we work with, including thyroid. Metabolic conditions, well, again, this is about your body's brakes and accelerators going out of sync. And it's all mostly linked to things like insulin. So we're living in abundance. We have huge amounts of Mars bars stored up. And all of this is causing metabolic disorders like diabetes, polycystic ovary syndrome, heart disease. Dementia is now seen as a metabolic disorder. Sleep disorders, again, sleep is a signal of distress. And in most cases, your cortisol levels are up. So if you can't get to sleep, you're wired. But most people find that they're exhausted, they get to sleep, and then they get a 2 a.m. wake-up call. Their brain's whizzing. And despite the fact their body's tired, their brains are wired, that's cortisol. And melatonin will not come out to play when cortisol's there. Because, as I said, it's that saber-tooth tiger under your bed. So the body's saying, you've got to stay awake. Gut dysfunction, again, although we look at gut for everybody, there's specific treatments that we've done for the gut, but we don't do anything without that process of cleaning out. So irritable bowel syndrome, colitis, intolerances. Now, intolerances, do they really exist, or is it the gut telling you, I'm not ready for this particular food because I'm broken? And what we find is by fixing the gut, these intolerances go. We're not born with intolerances. Cardiovascular, again, we talk about blood pressure. I would say in our practice, patients who come to see us with blood pressure, it's interesting. We sometimes do even 9 to 12 readings, and the reading they come in with to the reading at the end is totally different, which shows us that most people's blood pressure is reactive. It's not a disease. It's a reactive state. Coming to see a doctor, putting a cuff on, worrying what he's going to say, what drugs he might be put on, gets your body into fight or flight. It's doing the right thing. But if we look at it differently and saying, what is going on in your body that's causing your body to react? Blood pressure should go up. You know, it's fight or flight, but as long as it comes down again. So by changing the ethos, we've literally stopped blood pressure tablets in about 95% of the patients that come in with us with that particular condition. Same with coronary heart disease, angina. Again, crash the inflammation, clean the body out of all its inflammatory markers, and the heart will behave. Psychological disorders. We're seeing a lot more diagnosis of ADHD, neurodiversity. Our view is that this is a brain that's not being fed properly. If you're wired in your physiology, the brain is fed sugar, the brain will get wired. The brain will then work harder and deplete the B12s, all the things that matter. We've worked with children and with adults where we've cleaned them out, had some fantastic results where the wired brain just settles. There's a very good book by Gabor Mate on scattered minds that talks about psychology being an inflammatory disorder, depression being an inflammatory disorder. And we cannot neglect the brain and the body. They're all one. So it doesn't matter what entry point is. We've got a stacking system that can deal with everything because our belief is that everything happens everywhere at the same time. So having gone through this process and hopefully got something out of it, it's very important that we become ambassadors of this, because if we are going to make some changes, we've got to sort of communicate the fact that there are different ways of managing things other than pharmacology and operations. And why do we need to do it? Well, there's a rising cost of drugs and diagnostic tests, and we're not improving longevity. We're increasing years, but not living as we described it. There's more chronic disease than ever before. And more importantly, we're now exporting chronic diseases to the developing countries. Where we've got rid of communicable diseases, we're now transferring diabetes, mental health. So effectively, the system hasn't really worked. All these 20,000 drugs haven't actually achieved anything. We're seeing more mental health and autoimmune disease. So effectively, what we're saying is once you've got agency over your own health, it's important that you become an advocate of that journey for those around you. Now, the key thing here to remember is we're living in this environment of nurture, but your cells are still in nature. So effectively, the approach is to try and bring nature into our lives. Now, we can't do it by changing our lives. We can't go back to the savannas. So this process that we've sort of formulated is one way of getting one step towards that. Thank you.
That's truly, truly amazing and inspirational, and certainly my blood pressure has dropped significantly, and I am quite a donut-making machine with more than my helpful share of Mars bar stored. Time for questions, please, and also Noah Lath here is going to join us, and from the Longevity Clinic, so please spread your questions around. And so we have a microphone, so if you can raise your hands. So we have someone over here on the right. If you could introduce yourself and then the question.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation. I was intrigued by your slide showing the ascent of the man, followed by the arrival of seriously obese man. Slightly interesting. And it seems to me there's a paradox here that it's generally accepted that we are living longer now than we used to. I know your definition of longevity is not just living longer. But this might, obviously, we were living longer than 100 years ago, and certainly more than 500 or 1,000. And I wonder, is this due to fewer wars and plagues, or advances in medical science? Well, I just sort of want your explanation of that.
Yeah. So I think modern medicine has done a significantly good job in getting rid of the major causes of illness. So obstetric care, sepsis through bad water, cholera. So when it comes to communicable diseases and injury-related diseases in terms of how we live, I think modern medicine has been brilliant in that. So unfortunately, though, what we've now done is replace those benefits with other problems. So we're around longer because we've not been eaten by a tiger, or childbirth issues or infections. Hence, the length of life has got better, but the quality of life is where we're now looking at, and particularly in the last 10, 15, 20 years. So I think medicine has achieved a certain point, but now it's slipping. And in fact, the data for the last 2-3 years has shown that life expectancy is beginning to drop now. So all of these things I'm talking about is beginning to kick in, and that's a bit of a worry. So it's the first time in the last 2 years that life expectancy is actually dropping.
Okay, another question, please. Yes, here, we'll just get you a microphone, and if you could introduce yourself and perhaps speak a little louder. Thank you.
Hello, thanks for the talk. My name's Charlie, and my issue was mainly on your fasting period that you get people to do. So do you have, is it just a water base? Do they have electrolytes while they do it? And do you say not to exercise too extensively? I mean, you mentioned earlier cold plunges, saunas, etc. That's obviously stress on my body. You try and do one thing at a time.
Absolutely. So if you look at the autophagy fasting, it's R2, the second stage. Now, for us, we do your body comp index and we get an idea of how many kilos of fat are sitting in that larder. And so the fasting time, whilst there's a standard, is bespoke to your needs. Not everyone needs to fast. So what we say in these individuals is we know that 3 days should be sufficient in most people to empty the Mars bars out. Now, of course, when these Mars bars move their sugar, they take water with them. We don't have a problem with water loss, but there's minerals in that water. So when people feel unwell during a 3-day water fast, they're not starving. There's plenty of food in there. There's plenty of Mars bars. It's the fact that the minerals have shifted. So we always insist that in the first 3 days of a water fast, we give mineral support. So we use Celtic salt or hypertonic saline. So as the sugar moves, you restore the minerals. And we are a circuit, and it's that mineral loss that causes the problem. The second thing to remember about fasting, it's different in men and women. So for women who are having periods, we never fast them 7 days before that period, because the body will not let go of the sugar. It will say it's not for you, it's for a potential baby. So women will struggle if we get the timing wrong. So the fasting time, the amount of fasting is dictated by the personal individual situation. Regarding hormesis, I would not do any hormesis activity during a fast, because fasting itself is hormesis. So you don't want to aggravate that further. The cold plunges, the steam, I think should come later. But as a relative intervention, the autophagy is a very powerful tool. But you don't want to add to the autophagy by doing the other thing. So we say exercise, go for a walk, go for a jog, but don't do any HIIT exercises.
Okay, and we can all catch up with Ash afterwards. So more questions? Yes. I'll just get a microphone to you. Before we just address that question, I wanted to bring just Noah Lathan from the Longevity Clinic and just ask you use fasting and autophagy, and you just explain how you do it, because I mean, people have a different way of approaching it. You do it at least a long fast once a year and then also once a week.
You hear me now, Mehmet?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, great presentation, Ash. In our clinic and with in our family, we use a lot of autophagy and hormesis, and actually fasting is one of the fastest way to kill any zombie cells and clean your body. And if you want to use a protocol, trick your brain in telling yourself, look, I'm gonna do this only for 1 month, and then I go back to my life. Usually what happens is after 1 month, we never want to go back. And I've tried that on everyone, including my 76-year-old mother. And she, until now, she's last 5 years, she eats 1 meal a day. But now you don't have to go from eating 5 times a day or 3 times a day to 1 meal, but you can implement it kind of slowly in your life. And yeah, the best thing is to shorten the time frame of food and having 1 day a week just a break for your digestive system.
Who knew less is more? So there you have it. So your question, we just, when you get the microphone, we'll pass this, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that.
Hi, I'm Caroline Scully. I'm actually living as a whole 8 years now. But that family, now they call it into the fasting for 8 years. I only eat about 60 hours, 6-7 days, something like that. And I'm now, for a year and a half after the children have started eating 6 days a week. So if you say, and my body composition is very low in fat, but if you say someone that is already low in fat resources, no Mars bars stored or many, how would you say to someone that wants to go the extra mile? How do you kickstart that cleanse from that?
Yeah, so this is very important. In So in most of us, it's about the Mars bars first to get them out. The thing is, when you're generating 3.8 million cells per second, that protein debris, the second larder, is still going to accumulate. Less so than the person who's only using Mars bars for food. So for me, I feel that autophagy fasting for someone with very low fat is still very powerful, because it's about removing the protein debris. It's about not the fat anymore, it's about the debris. It's not about the sugar, it's about the debris. So you would probably need to just do an intermittent fast, in my opinion, once every 2 weeks. And again, choosing it around cycles is very important. But a 36-hour fast every 2 weeks, it sounds hard, but when you do it, you'll find that you own this forever. And a lot of our patients who've done the full-blown NOMAD plan find that they know when they're getting more inflamed, and they just put themselves on a fast and they do a spring clean rather than that deep clean. But a 36-hour fast every 2 weeks is a very good way of really cleaning the system out.
Great stuff. Another question. Okay, we'll get you. We'll get a microphone to you. Thank you. And if you could raise your voice, it'd be great. Thank you.
Hi. Is it working?
Yeah.
Sorry. I just wanted to ask about SIBO and gut health. I mean, years ago, I took him to SIBO over 10 years ago, before it all came out in like the last 5 years. And you mentioned it's the small intestine is one of the most important in our body. In your experience with treatments, has anybody been through SIBO treatment? Do you think it could ever be eradicated fully? Because it has a tendency of more risks to come back. So I just wondered if it's been treated successfully long term.
Yes. So remember, there's 23 trillion bacteria in that ecosystem living in harmony. So small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is a bit like having weeds in your garden. There's a growth of something that shouldn't be there, and it's sucking the nutrients of the good stuff. So when you get SIBO, you'll just have a downstream effect on the rest of your bacteria. The answer is it's 100% completely curable. Completely curable. The reason why people come back is they just take the gut intervention. They don't do the detox. Very few. They'll take the antibiotics, or they'll go onto an elemental diet for a little while. It's not good enough. You've got to treat the adrenal gland. You've got to treat the brain. You've got to treat the liver. You've almost got to take a full approach. SIBO is consequential to psychological distress, because the brain will inflame the gut, change the ecosystem, and SIBO will come up. The other thing is, when we give antibiotics and quieten down the weeds, if we don't fix the leaky gut linked to that, it's going to come back again, which is why there's treatment failures. So this is the thing. Why should it come back if we do it properly? And I think we suppress the symptom for a bit so people don't get bloated or wind. And then 6 months later, they're back to square one again. So we need to take a much more integrated approach around the detox, the repair, and the renew across the whole system.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks for another speech. I'm here as an advocate for liver tests. You won't expect me to say this, but as you know, my wife's been treated by yourself and your staff for 2-3 years. She's an ex-model, first wave, and a beautiful lady. She got ADHD, she suffers from chronic Lyme disease, and everything that you've had in your presentation she's got. She had a gym instructor 3 days a week, life and soul of every party, and then she got Lyme disease. We came to see you in 2021, 2022, I believe. She couldn't climb a flight of steps. Where we are now, she's doing 2 kilometres a day walks. She's happy, her gut's getting better, she's sleeping well, and all in all, our whole life's a lot better. So for me, to be here today is an advocate for you and your whole company. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ash, if you could, a final word from Ash before we send you out, and there'll be room outside, to sum up the evening and the transformative potential that this organisation this kind of remarkable movement that you're leading can bring to everybody, our lives here in this country and beyond.
Yeah. So I guess just another caveat based on the research on top of all of this is that data's come out that if all of you live another 15 years, that 123 can become 150. So on that basis, we're booking our next Millennium course now, and you can register your interest, and we'd love to see you all then.
Well, listen. I'm not too sure anybody wants to see another 75 years of me on this planet, and I fully understand why. A great thanks to Noah Lace from the Longevity Clinic. A great thank you to all the health partners and supporters here. I won't name them because we've run out of time. And of course, a great thank you to all the staff at Levitas and the Harbour Hotel for making this happen. And to Ash, again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.